Hi, I'm Kevin Wagner of Sokol Associates. I've been working with Fleet Farm for 31 years, and I'm going to help you go through Fly Fishing 101. Fly fishing is, for those that partake in it, considered an art form. Fly fishing has been around since the modern form since the 1800s, but it's been around since 200 AD, where they can find records of it. If you think of the traditional fishing equipment that we have today as spinning reels and bait casters, if you even go and look at your fathers or your grandfathers or grandmothers gear, it was rudimentary. Bait casters and spinning reels barely existed. That's all pretty much new since about the 1940s and 50s. Prior to that, more people were fly fishing or fishing with cane poles than modern fishing equipment that you see in your stores today. So let's go over fly fishing. So fly fishing, it's an angling method in which an artificial fly is used. You're not using night crawlers or minnows or crickets or frogs. You are creating a fly. So, or whatever other type of bug or critter that the fish would be eating. So, because of that, it's a very weightless product. If you look at all the lures that we use today in the traditional side, we are casting what they used to call plugs or spinner baits. They all have a lot of weight to them, and they create the momentum to cast that lure. But a fly is relatively weightless, and because of that, you have to use your fly rod and the line. Actually, the line is the key component to cast that fly. So you have your fly line. Oh, there I have it in my thing. You have your fly rod, you have your line, you have your backing, which is behind the line. That you don't need to have all of your line when you're fly fishing is not the same. You have a leader, you have a tippet, you have your fly line, which the fly line is the weighted line that helps you cast your fly, and you have your backing. That's the extra stuff, just in case the fish runs a long ways. You don't need to have expensive fly line to back it up. And then leader and tippet, which we talked about. Fly casting basics. The way the fly carries the fly, and we already talked about that. So now you have your line and your leader and your tippet and your flies out there, and this gets kind of technical. Pickup cast, back cast, forward cast, lay down or presentation cast. Here we're going to look at it here. The fly line, which is up here, is weighted, so that when you cast back, that loads the rod. And then when you cast it forward, or when you bring your rod forward, that creates that momentum. It creates a loop. You're going to have to pay attention to that loop. You don't want a big winding loop. You want a tight loop like they have there. Oh, there we go. Again, it says it there. You don't want those big loops, or otherwise it loses energy. Fly fishing is about an artful way of capturing energy and presenting a lure with it. You'll see people that are going, those are called false casts. You don't need that false cast. You pick the line up off the water, then you bring it back and you let it wait, and you load it and load it. And you can feel it load on your arm, and then you bring it back forward. And you want to keep your wrists stiff when you do that. In fact, here it says excessive false castings when you're going back and forth. Let me move myself up here. When you break your wrist, the line doesn't stay up. You want that line, when you're casting it, to stay on a level plane. You don't want it looping back and forth. You want it back. You want to keep it on a level plane. So think of the tip of your fly rod on a level plane as well. Even though it's going to straighten out, try to keep it on a level plane. That'll keep you a tight loop. And one of the things that happens is you break your wrist, and when you break your wrist, that's when, instead of being on a level loop, all of a sudden it comes back down, and that forces the direction of the fly. Just keep a wrist tight and don't do excessive. Cracking whip. If you hear your fly go, that means you're not letting it load. So when you bring your rod back, you wait. And I was taught how to fly fish on a bamboo rod, which is much slower than the current carbon fibers and graphites. You actually feel it load, and then you bring it forward. What happens now is, because our technology is so good, we lose some of that touch and feel. So you go back, and it's easy to pull that rod forward right away, but you want to feel it load. Bring that rod back and wait, and then bring it forward. Yeah. Okay. I guess it says it on here too. A roll cast is simply, this is getting technical. If you ever have a chance, watch the movie A River Runs Through It. In fact, if you have a chance to listen to the audiobook, A River Runs Through It, it's fantastic. All the accents are Scottish and it's beautiful. But what you want to do is you actually leave the line tensioned on the water, and you get a D loop on, you let that tension go, and then all of a sudden it's just like loading the rod, and now it'll snap forward. You're gonna hear about a roll cast, but honestly, most people just do a standard cast. Fly line. Now this is the really where we get into more of the technical parts. A variety of general and specialized fly line are used to cast flies on under in fresh and saltwater conditions. So, all right, you're going to hear this. These are the terms we want to look at right here. Now, let me get a little red pen. This here, it's not working right, but this here is weight forward, 6 weight, and it's forward weighted. So there's going to be level lines, which would be what they would have up in this area here. There's weight forward, which we currently have there, and then we have a double taper. That's it more for accurate casting. You don't, level line is very inexpensive. It's not very accurate. Sinking is this S here. That would be, this is F is for floating. Back here, if there was an S, there would be sinking line, so you can fish subsurface. Think of it as jig fishing with a fly rod. Then there's floating and sinking lines, and what that will do is the line will float on top, but then the tip will sink. So it's more of a, think of it almost like ice fishing with fly line. And it helps you pick up your line easier because all your line is not under the water. So the floating part keeps it on the water, helps you break the tension, and then bring the rod back. So you're going to see all of your fly lines are going to say, they're going to have like a WF or an L or a DT. Most of what you're going to sell is WF. And then we're going to talk next about this number. These numbers are going to go pretty much from 1 to 13, and most of what you're going to carry is going to be 3 to 8, maybe some 10. And the final number or letter is an F or an S in most cases, and you're going to have some FSs as well. A level line. So you're going to see that your line looks kind of almost plasticky. It's a poly. What it is there's typically a strand in the old days of Dacron or silk, and nowadays it may be Kevlar or a braid, and then they put this poly over the top of it. When you have a double taper, it's fat and it's thinner on the outsides, again, so it helps you get a really nice, delicate presentation. A weight forward. Now, this is the side that would be tied to your reel. So this would be weight forward, and you want to make sure you tie it on your fly reel properly. But because there's more weight here, it really helps throw that momentum out there. And then you have a weight forward, medium taper, short taper. There's shooting heads where it's not very accurate, but there's very little drag here, and then all the weight's out up front, and it's almost like throwing a slingshot. You don't know where it's going to end up, but it's going to go pretty far. And there's a Skagit line. Listen, you don't need to worry about all the rest of this stuff once we get past weight forward. That gets kind of esoteric, and it's important at some points in time, but not for your average customer coming in the store. Fly line features, talked about it. F is floating, S is sinking, FS is floating, sinking. Pressure saltwater compatible. There are lines that are made for saltwater, warmer temperatures, so the line doesn't get gooey in the sun. There's cold water lines so that it doesn't get too stiff in the cold for people that are fly fishing in Minnesota or Wisconsin in February and March. For the most part, that's not anything you really need to worry about too much either. And now we talk about match the hatch, and that's where these numbers are going to come into play. So you want to get your line, the weight of the, in relation to the weight of the, or the size of the fly that you're going to present. If you have a small fly, you want it very delicate, you're going to have it maybe down to like a 3 weight, which would be like for trout, and up to a 10, 11, or 12 weight for maybe like a pike or a muskie. And in between, bigger streams, bigger trout, maybe 5s or 6s, bass, walleyes, 6, 7s, and 8s. That's a general statement. Length of line can vary from 42 to 100 feet. There's a lot of different colors, and people like to see the line on the water, so it's brighter colors in a lot of cases. Floating lines present dry flies and poppers on the surface. You want to keep the dry flies and the poppers. You don't want them to sink down, so that's why you have a floating line. Easy to pick up for casting. Sinking lines present wet flies and streamers at depths allowed by the sink rate. So a sinking line has different sink rate, and it has tungsten in that little colorful poly line coating that helps it sink. So think of it like jig fishing, where you have wet flies, streamers that are made to look like worms or leeches, and so you're doing those types of presentations. It takes practice. This is something you can do when you're practicing fly casting. Is you don't need to have a fly on it because it's the line that's important. You can go to the park or your backyard and practice your casting. Don't worry about casting long. Just get the mechanics of it down and start working on your accuracy. Put a little hula hoop out there and try to get the tip of your line to land in that hula hoop. Oh, we see a new word here, mend. What mend means is how you flip your line around. They call it mending your line. Fly rods, they're designated by line weight. So you'll have your smallest are going to be like in that size 0. You're not going to sell any of those. You probably start at a size 3. They're going to go up to 16, which is the largest. The fly line should match the rod weight, and it should match the type of flies that the person's going to be presenting. So if somebody comes in the store and says, I'm going to be fishing for brooks trout on small streams, you know that they're going to have small flies in the size 16 or 18, which is tiny, matches the hook size. And so you're probably looking at a 3-weight, maybe a 4-weight fly rod. If they say, I'm going to be going to the one of the big rivers in Montana, then you know that they probably want a 5 or 6 weight because they're going to be fishing big water, big flies. And if they're going to be fishing pike or bass, you're probably going to get them up to a 7 or 8 or even a 10 if they're going to be fishing pike or muskies. Rod lengths can vary from 6 to 15. You know, most of your rods that you're going to have are going to be in that 8.5, 9 foot range. That's a very common size. Now, if you have some of the 3-weight guys, they might be fishing brook trout and it's a lot of brush and cover. They can't take a long rod. They might fish with a 7-foot rod, but then if you get to the 10 and 11 weight rod guys, they might be going down to the ocean, and they've got to get really long casts, long deliveries with that fly for tarpon. And then they might have a 10-foot rod or maybe even something a little bit longer. But for the most part, you're going to see rods go from 7 to about 10 feet. So this right here says 9-foot 8-weight. If they've got a 9-foot 8-weight, which is a very common rod for bass fishermen, walleye fishermen, and smaller pike fishermen, that's a very common rod. That's my favorite rod to fish with smallmouths in rivers. Here we go, 012, small stream trout, 3, 4, 5, medium-sized stream trout, 6, 7, large stream trout, panfish and bass, 8, 9, 10, largemouth bass, steelhead, salmon, 11, 12, 13, northern pike, muskie, saltwater, and 14, 15, 16, large saltwater. Most of my muskie fishing that I do with a fly rod is in that 10 weight, just because I don't want to fatigue my arm all day. Panfish is a blast, and that I forgot to mention that earlier on, that 6 and 7 weight. They tend to use a lot of poppers, so they'll use a weight forward floating line in a 6 or maybe a 7, but the 6 is going to be pretty common. There's your fly rods. Fly rods, instead of being 1 piece, a lot of times are 3-piece and 4-piece, simply because they need to move them around and pack them in, pack them out. And the ferrule technology on a fly rod today is phenomenal. Again, the actions on a fly rod, you don't have to worry too much about that. The average fisherman's not asking about the action on a fly rod, but it closely mimics what's on a spinning or a casting rod. Slower is what the bamboo would feel like. Moderate are when you start getting into more of the traditional or the new modern materials. Fast are where you have the carbon fiber. They can hold the bigger flies up in the air. They don't bend quite as fast, but when they do break, it's very, very stiff, so it can hold, but just the tip has the flexibility. Extra fast would mean just the tiny part of the tip has flexibility, and that's where you carry the line up in the wind. Again, rod's made out of bamboo, steel, fiberglass, composite, graphite. There's all kinds. Fly reels. For the most part, a fly reel is simply, it holds a line. You don't usually use the drag very much. You don't use it to fight the fish very much. In all honesty, the fly reel is, if somebody needs to be budget conscious, the fly reel is a place to be budget conscious, because all it really does is hold a line. You strip the line out when you're starting to cast, and you have line laying on the water in the boat or wherever you're at. You're not really using the line except when you are under load with a fish, and then you're stripping it in. The only time a lot of times you use the reel or even the drag is to put the line back on the reel at the end of the day. So if somebody needs to be budget conscious, that's a place they can be budget conscious. They don't need a $300 reel. They can get by with the sub $100 reels quite easily. You need to know how to tie the lines to the reel. That's one of the important parts. So here's the reel. This inner part is called the arbor. So you use an arbor knot. Okay, there we go. And then you can use an Albright knot to the line. So here's the arbor knot. So when you're tying line to the arbor of the reel, and there's other knots you can use. And if you've tied line on even a spinning reel or bait casting reel, you can use the same knot. And this is the backing that you're tying to the arbor. Then the backing, when you're tying one type of line to another type of line, backing to fly line, then you're going to use an Albright knot a lot. That's what a lot of fly fishermen use. There are other knots. And that's also a knot that you can use for tying your fly line to your leader or your leader to your tippet. So why do we have a backing? We know that's cheap line. We don't use it much. We have a fly line to deliver the fly. But then we have a leader and we have a tippet. And that is so we can taper down. The fly line is very thick relative to the fly because it has weight. But then you have to taper it down to get to the size of the fly hook. And that's what the leader and the tippet do. You don't really need to worry too much more about all the different types of fly reels. Leaders used to taper down from the fly line to the fly. Large diameter butt section attaches to the fly line. So a lot of your leaders will be tapered, so you'll have a bigger size. The butt size, you need to make sure that's the size, that side that is tied to the fly line, and that the tapered down size ties to the small fly. You can use nail knots, needle knots, braided loops. You probably have a nail knot tool in the store. And then you have a tippet section, which is tied to the leader. Once you break your leader, and you will break your leader, then you will tie tippet to it, which is the very small diameter. Fly fishermen usually refer to it in sizes of X as opposed to traditional fishermen that use pound test because they're more concerned about the diameter than the break strength. And here's how you attach your leader to your fly line. You can, let me move this, put it up here. Nail knot, loop knots. And you can find tutorials that are better than this online, YouTube or real tutorials on how to tie them. But just know that you should know a nail knot and you should know a loop knot because that's what fly fishermen like to use. Okay, I guess I mentioned this. X is which is the diameter. And then you have 7 foot, 9 foot, and even 12-foot leaders. Again, you have nylon and fluorocarbon leaders. So when you get into that, it tends to be the lighter line that you're using, the shorter the leader. And there are people that fluorocarbon by nature sinks faster than nylon. Nylon will float more. So if you're trying to do a floating presentation, make sure you're using a nylon line. If you're using a fluorocarbon, if a sinking presentation, you're better off going with a fluorocarbon line. Fluorocarbon is more durable, so if you have toothy critters in the area, they are less likely to break the leader or the tippet, but that's not foolproof. So those are some of the things you want to look at in leaders. Some will be designated as a trout leader. So a 6X is a 6X diameter, would be about a 3.7 break strength, but that's not universal. If you have a nylon line, a 6X may be a 3.7, but if it's in a fluorocarbon, it may be a 7-pound break strength. So you have your butt section, midsection, tippet of your fly line, leaders, your leader, which I kind of talked about that. The butt section is the thicker section, ties to your fly line, and your tippet, your midsection, tippet, the skinniest section, ties to your fly. And as you break it, you replace your leader with more tippet. And that's a good place to do a blood knot, surgeon's knot. I use a double uni knot. I have forever. It just works good. And so tippet is something even different than your leader. And your tippet, typically, your leaders may be tapered, but your tippet is not tapered. It is typically a 5X and you'll see guys with spools of these things on their vest. They'll have different sizes. So if they were using a 5X and they think that the bite is finicky, they'll go down to a 4X or a 3X. And these are what the tippet spools look like. I think I talked a lot about that already. They're typically in 25 to 30 meter or yard spools, depends on who's making them. Leader to tippet knots. There's the blood knot. There's the surgeon's knot. Again, know these knots. They're easy to learn online. And then you want to tie to the fly. Now, when you're tying your tippet or the end of your leader to your fly, it's the same knot you use in traditional fishing. I like to use the improved clinch knot. You can use a polymer knot. You can use a uni knot. Whatever you're comfortable with. Some people will use people used to call the Rapala knot. So it's got a little bit of a loop on here, or a loop knot, but it gives the fly a little bit more swing and play. It's really not that important in a fly. And again, here's the fly. So you have the hackles and you have the hook, and there's a whole variety of terminology that can be used. Entomology, the study of bugs and insects. Dry flies imitate insects floating on the surface. Wet flies imitate larvae, fish below the surface. Streamers imitate a minnow below the surface. Nymphs imitate a larva near the bottom. Emergers are a fly that is fished in the surface film. So you'll see sometimes that foamy water, and that's a fly that when you study bugs, the eggs lay, they get down in the mud, they emerge, and then they work from a larva and they work their way up. And once they get to the surface, that's when they go basically from a larva into a fly. They get on the surface and they're in that surface water, and that's where you'll see a lot of trout especially feed on the surface. Bass bugs imitate forage based swimming and floating. Poppers imitate floating insects and frogs on the surface. Get the hatch chart for this is very important. Get the hatch chart for your region, so you're going to know what all the different streams and lakes and rivers. There are hatch charts somewhere online, I guarantee it. Find out what they are, so you're going to know what the customer is asking for in that season, or what he's going to be asking for in the next season, or the guys that are a little bit behind what just got done hatching. And you're going to find these all over the place. There you go. I tried to keep this under 30 minutes. I've got it down to 24 right now. If you have any questions, let me know. I hope this works out great for you. Thank you. Have a great day.